Welcome to the podcast series Talking Success, connecting the global FinTech community. I'm Stacey Jafta, and today I'll be chatting with Simon Ellis, co-founder and CEO of SmartWage. SmartWage is a South African technology company that enables employers to offer their employees access to earned wages. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Stacey, great to be here. I'm really well, thanks. How are you?
I am good. I am in sunny Cape Town. I've been having lots of meetings today and everyone's complaining about the weather wherever they are, whether it's too hot, too cold. Where in the world are you?
I'm actually in Watamu in Kenya and I am not complaining. It's 31 degrees and absolutely beautiful. I came back to SA for some work. I live in the UK and had to make my way back to the UK in order to avoid hotel quarantine. Kenya is not currently on the red list, so I decided to stop off and work here for 10 days, and it's been amazing. If you ever get a chance to visit Watamu, I would highly suggest it.
For some reason, I thought you were there on business.
I wish I was. Maybe Kenya's on the to-do list at some stage for SmartWage, but unfortunately, it's just a working holiday, if you could call it that.
How has it been working remotely for a South African company from the UK?
Great question. I think the world's moved so fast in the last 12 months that working remotely or setting up a virtual team has been something that sort of most companies have had to face. So, we started SmartWage when it was February last year and then COVID hit. So we actually set everything up virtually. And in fact, interesting story, one of our co-founders, Caroline van der Merwe, I met virtually. She was in the States. And we spent sort of 4 or 5 months completely interacting through Zoom and Google Meets. I only met her in October, sort of like 6 months later. And she was a co-founder and a big shareholder in the business. So cool story, but I guess it tells you that anything is possible with the way things are set up. I think for us, it's about being quite deliberate, about creating a culture and a team that's able to work remotely or, and also facilitate from an employee perspective, the lifestyles that employees want to live, driving accountability and flexibility over a sort of rigid 8 to 5, which I think is a somewhat outdated concept.
Yes, there's clearly a lot I don't know, the beginning stages of SmartWage, but why don't you take it back a bit and tell me how the business got built, what led up to it? I want to hear it all.
Big question. Not quite sure where to start. But I grew up in South Africa. I went to university in Stellenbosch. But I guess the big part for me was when I went traveling. I took a year off to go traveling, and I actually started a blog called The Symptoms of Curiosity. But why I mention that is I think being curious is kind of where it started. I always wanted to understand why things were done like they were. And growing up in South Africa, obviously a fantastic place, but you're not necessarily exposed to the ways of the world and the way other people or other cultures do things. And I think that was one of the turning points for me, is kind of figuring out how other people were doing things and trying to work out why. Was it a result of the circumstances they were in or the traditions or the cultures? And that was when I kind of asked myself a lot of questions and I sort of started blogging about it. Sorry, I go on a tangent there, but to kind of lead me to SmartWage was I was working at Deloitte for a couple of years doing my accounting articles, and I just realized I wanted to do a little bit more. I didn't look up at the partners I was working for and think I wanted to be like them. I think they all lived fantastic lives and were lovely people, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I made a deliberate effort to say, cool, I wanted to actually start something. And I tried so many different things, which ultimately all failed. But it was about being curious and figuring out, I guess, what most of the other people had figured out and trying to take what they'd figured out and apply it in a context where I was comfortable and where I could hopefully instigate some sort of change. And so we took an idea, which was earned wage access, a company called WageStream, and decided to see if we could launch it in South Africa. And someone once said to me, sort of, doing business in Africa is you've got to deliver things in a wheelbarrow, and I think it's a great saying, because South Africa or Africa, things are a lot simpler, and you've got to take the nuances around how you deliver products and how you do things are very different to the rest of the world, or rather the developed world. But there's a lot of concepts you can take from the developed world and take them to a developing country and implement them.
You just mentioned trying different businesses, not everything working out in your favor. Many have ideas, but not many make them into something. How did you bring your idea of SmartWage to life? And what do you think made this idea different?
Probably starting. I obviously started a few other things, which as I said, didn't work out. But I'd say it probably goes down to three things. Everyone's got cool ideas, whether it's starting a boutique hotel or doing an eco retreat or in our case, SmartWage. But we just had to start. We actually had to commit to doing something about it. The second thing I would say is people. Getting the right people involved early on was critical for us. And then the last one is perseverance. There were so many times, and still are so many times where there's a good reason that we could give up. We got denied early on. The regulator first said we weren't allowed to operate, and then our WhatsApp got blocked by Facebook, and then we had an employee issue, and there were so many reasons to fail. And I guess you just have to persevere through them and know that I think on the journey there's a lot of highs and lows. And I would probably say that was the biggest reason I didn't get the previous ideas off the ground, was because I didn't persevere. I didn't also get the right people around the table. And if you bring those two together, I think you can not achieve anything, but you can certainly get started and get moving on an idea.
We were chatting about how you've helped multiple businesses raise seed funding. What have you found to be the common factor with those that have found great success that can be measured by reaching or exceeding their monetary goal, even just being perceived well by investors?
I think the first thing is passion and energy. A lot of teams, there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, but the people that have this infectious energy and passion are not super excited about what they're doing. You can feel it, you can tell it, and I think investors absolutely love that. The second big thing is probably like realizing that there's no such thing as problems, only solutions. And it was an interesting sort of change for me, where I went from working in a corporate world where I don't think you talked about the word problems a lot. And you realize in startup that everyone talks openly about the problems they have. What do you, and we've got lots of problems as it stands, and how they're then solving them. And I think investors love to see people who have, audacious ideas about ways to solve, age-old problems. So I think raising funding has got a lot to do with the team and the people, but also the stories you tell. People love a good story. And I know that sounds maybe cliche, but stories that have impact and purpose and are crafted well do well. I mean, you look at WeWork. WeWork is a fantastic story. Now obviously the story didn't work out, but people bought into the fact that WeWork was not the traditional office business. It was a technology business, and people bought into that for a long time. And so I think the stories are really important. And the last thing I'd probably mention is the ability to build relationships. Fundraising is a bit like dating. You've got to start small and build a relationship with people over time.
Any advice for those in seed funding stages?
Start building relationships with people early on, and make sure you're fully committed to what you're doing and super passionate about what you're doing. I think those things go a long way. People can feel the energy and the passion. It's quite tangible. I don't think, you can read lots of blogs, and I guess that's how I started as well. But yeah.
Is SmartWage solving the big problem you went into this business thinking you would? Went to investors thinking you would? Did you pitch this problem to investors? I'm really curious to know where you are today versus where you thought you'd be.
Not really. I mean, earned wage access was the solution, giving people access to their wages as they've earned them. But, I was talking about it earlier today. There's that famous quote by Mike Tyson, which kind of says everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And you can build this elaborate business plan, but ultimately you only really figure out what the real problem is when you put yourself in the consumer's shoes. And I think that's incredibly hard. Like, how do you actually begin to figure out what the problem is, and how do you, and the only real way to do that is to try and put yourself in the consumer's shoes. Often people are solving problems where they are the consumer. They had the problem and then they solved for it. In this case, we weren't necessarily the consumer we're targeting. And so the problem we thought we were solving, which would have applied to me or to the people that I'm working with at the moment and my colleagues, it was not really the problem we were solving. It was a different demographic, a different type of person, working in a different job with a different problem. And we needed to understand what that problem was for them, for when I say them, for our consumer, and really sort of understand the nuances of that. How did they view the problem, and how did they want the problem to be solved? And so it was really about sort of talking to as many consumers as possible who we thought we were solving the problem for, and understanding it from their situation. I think that's an ongoing journey. I still don't think we've entirely figured it out. And I don't think we'll ever will.
So focus groups, or what was your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we've got focus groups. We went on the ground and spent time at malls talking to people. We consistently interview and talk to both qualitatively and quantitatively our consumers that are using the product, those that aren't using the product. Why are they not? One friend might use it and the other one decides not to. Why? And the answers are really interesting, because it comes down to something often that you didn't realize, or there's some part of it that you just can't figure out, and that's when you've got to really dig deeper. And I think, kind of taking a step back, when we started, we thought, SmartWage was for everyone. If you get paid on a monthly cycle, you need access to your earnings. But you realized you can't build a product that solves everyone's needs right from the get-go. So you had to, we had to focus on a very specific niche market or segment to start, and then build out, the rest of it.
A great piece of advice I heard was to not launch a product when it's perfect, but launch it when it's about 60, 70% ready, because once you launch, you learn that what you initially thought you're going to throw out the window, and you're going to carry on learning. And as you mentioned, you're continuously learning about what problems there are to solve. So yeah, that's really important.
I think you're spot on there. From our perspective, we launched a product that was entirely manual when we started. There was absolutely no automation. I think, and we went on the journey of trying to think that we needed to build the fanciest app, because that's kind of what everyone thinks in the beginning, unless you've done this before and you've got some good people around you, which we subsequently brought on board, but didn't have in the beginning. And you realize, like, how can we give a consumer the simplest form of product and let them give us their feedback, so they drive what the product becomes, rather than us driving what we think the product should be and then giving it to the consumer and they're saying, hold on, what's this? You guys have missed the point entirely.
Okay, doing things manually. This is something I was unaware of until recently. Many startups pretend to automate more than they actually do in the beginning stages. Why is this?
I think because you can only automate processes which need to be automated. So and you can only figure that out by doing them manually. So there's obviously things that should be automated and that will happen, but you need to validate that all the time. I was talking with a friend who's got an idea to launch a product, basically a salt and pepper product for in the kitchen, and just kind of saying, well, I think that my consumers want wooden salt and peppers. And you're saying, well, you think, or have you validated? And you need to validate as often as possible, and to not waste time on automating something that then is never used. You need to manually do it. So manually do it until you're sitting up until 2 a.m, and you realize, okay, we really need to automate. And that was some advice that a guy called Matt Henshaw gave me, and he's a brilliant guy who's got an amazing startup, but his advice really early on was critical. I think we were very close to sort of outsourcing our entire development to a product that we had never put in the hands of consumers, and entirely automating a journey which we'd never tested. Would have been a terrible mistake. And I'm glad we sort of got that advice. I would give the same advice to everyone else as well.
Okay, then I want to emphasize on the word pretend. Why pretend?
Could you deep dive on that? What do you mean by why?
So we were chatting about the fact that many startups pretend that they're automating more than they are. Why not just be completely open about doing things manually, or be open about the tools you're currently using, whether that's just an Excel spreadsheet?
I mean, great question, because when we talk to investors and you sell a story, it's like if I had to go to them and say, yep, we are sitting behind a WhatsApp solution, and I've got 5 customer service agents all sitting on WhatsApp. That's how we're responding to people. Or we built a WhatsApp chatbot, which is exactly the same thing, that automates conversations. It is automated because, in a way,
so elevating your product.
It's telling a good story, and everyone does it. From deliver. I was reading a story about delivery early on, and while they didn't provide details. Early on in the background, someone would order something from a restaurant, and you would then phone the restaurant and then tell them, but it's all happening through supposedly an app. But the consumer doesn't see that. And so you're figuring out, okay, this is how the consumer wants to be asked asked how to solve the problem. And this is how the business in this case wants to receive that information, and you're figuring it out, and then you're automating. So I think pretending is part of the process, and anyone who's been in a startup will know that that at the stage that most companies are at early on, most things are being automated, even though they talk about AI and machine learning, which is essentially buzzwords for they're interpreting things and making decisions based off a whole bunch of information and data.
I always think back to Airbnb and their story, and they did everything manually in the beginning, to even attending every single house, speaking to every single guest, speaking to every single host, getting references in person. But obviously having an app, things made it look like they were a lot more automated. But on the Pro, doing things manually, you also get to learn about it. You're more meticulous. Relying on automation, you don't actually get to see the process. You get to see the outcome.
Exactly. Paul Graham from Y Combinator, who's obviously backed my Airbnb, has got a great article that's called "Do Things That Don't Scale," and it explains exactly that.
Love it.
Figuring out all the things that literally aren't scalable. It's not scalable to go to everyone's house and figure out. But if they didn't go to everyone's house and manually knock on doors and get told, this is a crazy idea, they would never have got the traction they did, and they had to do that for a long time.
Exactly.
And now look at where they are.
Exactly. And something I want to talk to you more about is, you call SmartWage a social impact startup. How do you focus and measure your impact?
Well, I think, going a little bit a step back, I think everyone wants to do something that actually makes a difference. And typically it's quite hard to do. I think not often do you come across ideas which are a triple win. In our case, it's a win for us if we can find a commercial model that works. It's a win for the employer because you're, enhancing the productivity of their employees. And then for the employees, you're actually solving a really very real pain point by offering them essentially financial services at affordable rates. But social impact means, for us at least, that we're giving the consumer access to an affordable product, not because we could charge, and we are aware that our consumers are relatively price insensitive, but they're currently relatively excluded from the financial system. And by charging them extortionate rates, which some of our competitors do, we're not actually solving the problem. We're just making the problem worse. We wanted to make sure that when we set up the business, we're really setting it up in order to solve a problem and make an impact on the lives of South Africans. And I think that's been told a lot in kind of how we portray ourselves, but it really is at the heart of what we do. We're going through a big conversation at the moment with a potentially large, very large strategic partner, which is very exciting for us. But we've made it very clear upfront what our values are and what our principles are. And if the strategic partner that we're talking to wants to, take advantage of our consumers because we have a sticky product, we're not willing to work together. We've had to turn down, for example, we had a chance early on to work with a great betting company or a gambling company, and it would have really quadrupled our numbers. And we turned around and said that this is not in line with what we do. We don't encourage people to get access to their earnings and then spend it on gambling. So we decided against it, and commercially, look, maybe not the best decision because we potentially lost out on some revenue, but long term, I think a fantastic decision. And so everything we do has to be about making some sort of impact. And I think, one of our advisors always likes to talk about the 4 Ps, which is kind of profit, people, planet and purpose. And I think the future is, and the long-term future for businesses is not necessarily going to only be measured by traditional financial metrics. It's going to be measured by the impact you make, not only on the people you serve, but all stakeholders, whether it's investors, whether it's shareholders, whether it's the employees who work there, or the people who use your product. And that's really important to us.
That's incredible. Simon, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. It was incredible having you on the podcast.
Thank you, Stacey. It was great to chat. I enjoyed a couple of the tangents we went on. So I really enjoyed your podcast, and thanks for your time.
Of course. Where's the best place for listeners to reach you?
On LinkedIn or Twitter, it's Simon_R_Ellis.
Perfect. Thanks again, Simon.
Thanks, Stacey. Have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Talking Success, Connecting the Global FinTech Community. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn at Talent in the Cloud. And if you're interested in exec talent, expanding your team, or you yourself are looking for a new, exciting change in your career, check out our website, talentinthecloud.io.